So today we're going to be going over how to handle and socialize snakes, such as getting them out and just getting them more comfortable with human interaction and being handled. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and get started. So before we jump into today's video, I just want to point out that not all species of snakes tolerate handling well, and others do tolerate it well. And then you also have a few species that are kind of in between. So a couple examples would be children's pythons, which is what this girl is, are typically very docile and easy to handle regardless of how much socializing you do. Then you have other snakes like bull snakes that are typically sassy as babies, but typically with handling they do calm down and you can get them to where they're very handleable. Not always, but generally you can calm them down. Then you have snakes like emerald tree boas or green tree pythons that just don't typically like it and they don't tolerate it. So before you decide to get a snake, if you want a hands-on species, make sure that you do your research and that you choose a species that tolerates handling well. And if you're okay with having just a display animal that you don't touch a lot, then that's fine. There's lots of different species, some tolerate it, some don't. So just keep that in mind before purchasing an animal that they may or may not tolerate handling well. So either way, I just wanted to get that out of the way, but with that being said, let's go ahead and get started. Now the first thing for handling your snake is obviously just getting them out of their enclosure. And the most important thing when it comes to getting them out is making sure that you reach in at their level rather than coming in from above them. When you come in from above a snake, you look more like a predator that's going to harm them in some way or in general eat them. So you look more threatening and they're more likely to get stressed out, which is going to make handling them more difficult. Now when you're handling a terrestrial species, which is a ground-dwelling species, it's typically much easier to reach in and scoop them up. But if you have an arboreal species, which is a tree-dwelling species, it can be a little bit harder to get them out because they're typically wrapped around a branch or something in their enclosure. Another thing to keep in mind is that arboreal species are typically much more fragile because they're a much more slender and lean snake than most terrestrial species are, so they're going to be a bit more fragile. When you do go to remove an arboreal species of snake from their enclosure, make sure that you're being very gentle because, as I already mentioned, they're typically much more fragile. However, you can get removable perches and branches, which make it so you can just take the entire branch out of the enclosure and they can come off of the branch and onto you when they're ready. If they're on a branch or perch that is not removable and they're wrapped around it, don't try to force them off of it. You're more likely to injure them and stress them out. Another thing you can use when getting your snake out is a snake hook, and there are many different sizes of these. There are some that are made for very small snakes and some that are made for larger species. So if you feel a bit nervous reaching in with your snake, this is a much easier way to get them out, and then you can transfer them to your hands. Another thing you can do if you have a species that is food motivated, or if your snake is just in an area where they're not going to see you when you reach into their enclosure, you can gently tap them with the hook, letting them know that you're there and that you don't have food, and then you can pull them out with your hand. So now that you have your snake out of the enclosure, how do you actually handle them? And honestly, it's pretty simple. You don't need to grip them tightly or hold them behind the head or really restrain them in any way. This is just going to make them feel threatened and trapped. They're more likely to get stressed out and potentially bite you. So what you want to do is just kind of let them move freely through your hands. If you have a faster moving snake, you can just kind of move your hands like a conveyor belt while they slither through them. But otherwise, you just kind of let them wander around and they'll do what they're comfortable with. If they start to go somewhere that you don't want them, you can just gently pick them back up and move them back to where you want them. But as a general rule, you just kind of let them wander around like she's doing, and usually they'll stay pretty calm as long as they don't feel trapped or threatened in any way. Now the next thing you may be wondering is how often and how long you should be handling your snake for. So this is going to depend on a few different things. One being how old the snake is, whether they're an adult or a juvenile. Second, how much they've already been socialized and how comfortable they already are with people. And third, the species, because again, some species don't tolerate handling as well as others. So as a general rule, if you have a juvenile snake, which is a baby for those of you who don't know, they're typically much more nervous, and rightfully so. Speaking with how small juvenile snakes usually are, when you reach in, you look a lot bigger to them than say when you're reaching in with an adult snake. So with babies, typically you can start with just like 10 minutes a few times a week until they start to get more comfortable. And as they get more comfortable and older and start to grow in size, you can slowly start increasing that handling time and how often you're handling them. So as I mentioned a moment ago, the other thing that can kind of depend on how long you're handling your snake is the species. If you have, again, something like a children's python, once they're socialized, you can hold them quite a while. I've held her for like 45 minutes before. She just kind of hangs out with me while I do whatever. Whereas again, if you have something like a green tree python, typically you're going to want to keep your handling sessions a bit shorter, depending on how socialized they are and how comfortable they are. Again, most of them don't tolerate handling, but usually you don't want to make it much longer than like 10 or 15 minutes with something like that, because typically they just get stressed out. So again, just do your research on what type of snake you have, how well they typically tolerate handling, and then again, keep in mind the size of the snake and the age of your snake. And that actually wraps up today's video, so I hope you guys enjoyed it and that it helped you out when it comes to handling your snakes. Make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also jump on over to Reptile Rave on Instagram and give me a follow there. I do appreciate it. And anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed today's video, and I will see you in the next one.